All right, welcome to lunch, everyone. We still have lots of empty seats up here in the front, so feel free to trickle in. I'd like to take a moment again to thank some of our sponsors that brought us today's event. You'll notice in front of you that you have a really healthy selection of some fruits and vegetables. So this was brought to you by Get Healthy Utah. They helped us with our lunch selection today at the Little America. So if we can give a round of applause to the Get Healthy Utah team for our lunch, it'd be great. Again, our Wi-Fi password is Move Utah, all lowercase, and your program agenda can be found online at the Move Utah website. I'd like to take a moment and introduce our first keynote speaker for today's lunch programming. We will have Andrew Gruber with the Wasatch Front Regional Council. Andrew is the executive director, and his whole kind of premise right now at Wasatch Front is to develop a vision for our region over the course of the next 30 years. So this is Wasatch Choice 2050. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Gruber.
Thanks. Hey, everybody. Let's give Heidi and Muriel and the whole team that put this event together today a big round of applause. They did a great job. It takes a lot of work to do it, and we really appreciate it. Okay, so by show of hands, I want to ask you all, raise your hand if you love living in Utah. Okay, just about everybody. I think I saw some disgruntled folks in the back. Okay, now, a different question. Raise your hand if you are concerned about the impact on our quality of life that's going to happen from adding 2 million more people to Utah's population. Yeah, most of us. Well, I'll tell you, I'm concerned about that too. Growth is coming, and I'm happy to say that in Utah, we have a plan. And that plan is called Wasatch Choice 2050. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. How we can continue to have great quality of life and healthy and active communities. So we know that in Utah, we have friendly, neighborly communities. And in fact, I just saw a study recently that said Utah is the second happiest state in the country. Anybody know what the happiest is? Hawaii, that's right. And so you can't really be upset about losing happiest state to Hawaii, right? But we're the happiest, second happiest state, and happiest in the continental United States. And we have about the strongest economy in the nation, and we have just unparalleled access to the outdoors here right in our backyard in Utah. And so that high quality of life means that we are growing. And this isn't new, we've been growing. In 1970, we had about 1 million people in the state of Utah. Today, we're just over 3 million people. And by 2050, we will be over 5 million people in our state. And so you just think about the impacts that growth can have on us, on our traffic congestion, on our housing prices. Did you know that Utah's home price growth has been in the top 5 in price appreciation of any state in the country over the last decade? We're going up in housing prices about 7% a year, which exceeds the rate of income growth. And the average Utahn is spending about 59% of their income on housing and transportation combined. And for lower income families and communities, that it averages even higher, that pressure and burden that's placing on our families. And visitation to our beautiful natural spaces, our national park visitation has more than doubled over the past 10 years. So with all that growth, that leaves us with questions. What is our path forward as Utahns? And I'll tell you one thing that I think we all have to accept, and that is our quality of life, we cannot take it for granted. There is uncertainty, and there is risk, and there is concern in the communities about the impact of growth. Are our children and our grandchildren going to be able to live here? Are they even going to want to live here? Well, again, these issues are not new for Utah. We in Utah, you could call it, we have the Utah way. Some people have called it our secret sauce of collaboration and caring for our communities. And that's what's needed now. And that is what Wasatch Choice 2050 is all about. It's a blueprint for transportation and land use and economic development, all designed to preserve and even enhance our quality of life in the region. Now, there is no one-size-fits-all, okay? There's representatives in this room from our biggest city, from Salt Lake City. The mayor of Stockton in Tooele County is here, and all sorts of communities of every shape and size in between. There is no one-size-fits-all. Every community has to determine on their own what makes the most sense for that community. And that's where this vision comes from. It's not on high being deposited down to local communities. It reflects engagement over years through our organization, the Wasatch Front Regional Council, our sister organization, the Mountain Land Association of Governments in Utah County, the cities and the League of Cities and Towns, the county and the Association of Counties, UDOT, UTA, the Chambers of Commerce, academic institutions, civic organizations, all coming together to say, how do we handle growth in our region and still have great quality of life? And it really started with looking at goals, like what's important to us as a community. And even though there's no one-size-fits-all, there are certain things that we all, I think, can agree on. We want to have livable and healthy communities, quality transportation choices, clean air, access to jobs and educational opportunities. And then with those goals in mind, we went through the process of developing scenarios, different possible paths forward for growth and development in the future, and then ultimately settled into a preferred scenario, and then prioritized with the transportation agencies the best and most important transportation projects to address those growth patterns. And that's what Wasatch Choice is. Now, before I actually show you the vision itself, I want to talk about the 4 key strategies upon which the vision is based. Provide transportation choices, support housing options, preserve open space, and then link economic development with transportation and housing decisions. So let's talk about each of those a little bit, shall we? Provide transportation choices is the first. The majority of people will get around in our region and our state by driving. That is the way it is now, and that is the way it is projected to continue, and that is fine. But with the travel demand that is coming in the future, we will not be able to accommodate that growth simply by expanding the capacity of our roads. And this is not just me saying this. I don't know if Carlos is still here, but you can ask the UDOT folks, and they would agree with that as well, right? I see some UDOT folks over here, and there's nodding. Thank you, on cue. Appreciate that. We can't do that. So we have to invest in our road systems and make them as efficient and effective as possible, but we must also provide choices to people. Choices to bike and to walk, to take the bus and to take the train. Again, not everywhere necessarily, but people have to have the choice to do that so that they can have other ways other than driving to go from origin to destination, the first last mile connections, and it has to function as a system together. And in fact, that balanced approach is what underlies Utah's award-winning Unified Transportation Plan. We have a plan in Utah specifically for transportation that looks at all the modes of transportation, the need for capacity enhancements and maintenance and operation and preservation, that looks at all of that together. Now, if we do this, implementing the vision, we will enhance the transportation choices. Today, on the Wasatch Front, about 21% of Wasatch Front residents have access within a quarter mile to frequent and reliable transit service. And about 43% have access within a quarter mile to a safe and dedicated bikeway. If we implement the Wasatch Choice vision and the transportation plans, that will grow to 36% and 79% respectively. Now, To increase transit service and access, to increase bike paths and people's access, it's not just going to happen. Funding is an element of that. We must invest in our transportation system. And here's the reality of our funding picture looking out over the decades to come. Right now, with the funding sources we have in place, we will invest significant amounts of money in new road capacity, billions of dollars, in fact. And some people would say we shouldn't do that. I don't agree with that. I think that we have so much demand coming, we must invest in our roadways in a smart way. But the reality is that we basically have no or very little resources available to invest in providing additional transit. We have to invest in our roadways, and we must increase our spending on transit and biking to provide more of a balanced system over the years to come. Okay, strategy number 2, support housing options. It's essentially the same basic point, right? The majority of people on the Wasatch Front and in Utah will live in single-family detached homes. However, there is more demand now than there ever has been before for a different mix of housing. So what does that mean? Well, duplexes, condos, townhomes, apartments, a mix to satisfy and respond to the market demand. Now again, there is no one-size-fits-all. So what works in Ogden is not necessarily what's going to work in Hooper, right? What works in Salt Lake City isn't necessarily going to be what works in Harriman, right? You get the point. But if for our whole region and at all income levels and at all age, levels of age, we can provide choices and options to people, then that is responding to the market and demographic demands. Now, today, the housing mix on the Wasatch Front, actually in Utah, is about 75-25. 75% of our households are single family, and 25% is anything other than that. Multifamily, townhome, duplex, apartment, anything other than that. What the vision, the Wasatch Choice vision contemplates is that that will shift gradually over time to about 60-40. So in other words, a 15% increase in the percentage of households that are multifamily. Still, the majority being single family. So that gradual shifting over time. And if we can do that, we're therefore responding to the demand for housing. Some of that housing is going to be able to be more affordable. It's going to be in closer proximity to jobs and transportation, which then brings down the total household and transportation costs. It helps with our health if people are able to live in multifamily housing that's in proximity to transportation. So this housing question cannot be detached from transportation, and it cannot be detached from health. Okay, strategy number 3, preserve open space. The iconic mountains that we love so much, we have to make sure that we protect them in appropriate ways so that people can continue to enjoy them and preserve that natural environment. But it's not just about our mountains, it's also about our farmland, right? We are consuming with development a significant amount of our farmland, and then also just within our communities, having a woven right into the fabric parks and trails and open space, and that's so important for quality of life. Now, as we look ahead in the vision, what is going to happen for development? And let's put that back up there, thank you. In the vision, if we develop in the way, if we grow and develop in the way contemplated by the Wasatch Choice vision, we will actually consume less open space. We will save over 27,000 acres of open space or farmland because different development patterns have a different footprint. And so the way we develop has a huge impact. And then if we're doing that, of course that translates to people being able to go out more, to be more active in these wonderful spaces. Okay, strategy number 4, this is where the magic happens, linking economic development with transportation and housing decisions. Now that's a little bit of a mouthful, so let me give you a Ted Knowlton coined term, #WhereMatters. right? Where we are locating new housing, where we are encouraging job creation. And if what we can do is we can create opportunities for coordination so that if somebody lives close to a transit station, then they have the ability to access through transit jobs all over the region. So they have more access to job and educational opportunities. For a business, if a business chooses to locate in proximity to high-capacity transportation, then they're getting access to more workers and to more customers. Now, let me just give you just real quick a personal sort of story. WFRC, we just recently moved our offices. We were in the International Center, which is just west of the airport. It's a funny name for it, but basically you can only get there by driving. I mean, practically speaking. And we recently moved our offices, so we're now at the north end of the gateway. We're right by I-15, and we're also right by the North Temple Frontrunner Station and the tracks. Now, we have an employee, I'm not going to say what his name is, but he sent an email around to our entire office, and the title of his email was, "How does our office move change my life?" And what he said is that I'm probably saying too much, but he has a medical condition that causes him sometimes to get drowsy. And he was driving to work every day. And he said it was actually scary for him because sometimes he would get drowsy on the freeway. Probably scary for you too, right? And then he also said in the middle of the day where we were before, there was nowhere good to go out and walk. And so he would take naps. And I'm not criticizing him, just to be clear. But he said now that we've moved to our new office, he's taking Frontrunner to work. And in the middle of the day, instead of taking a short nap, he's going out and he's walking around the city. And he said it changed his life. So the location of our office, where jobs are located in proximity to transportation, huge impact. And of course, it's not putting congestion onto the road either. Okay, so blah, 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 lots of words. Let me show you something about images of what I'm talking about here, potentially. So this is an image of a pretty traditional suburban strip development with some commercials served by road only. Now imagine that, it's actually Layton City. Imagine that now served, as it is now, with Frontrunner in the background. So still driving and Frontrunner, and also pedestrian amenities for more safer walking and biking. And then imagine it with a mix of uses. So there's some retail and restaurants on the first level, offices or shops offices or homes, on the second level. So this, this is not downtown Salt Lake City, which is a wonderful place, but this might be more in keeping with the character of some of our smaller communities. So does that make sense? The idea that we would coordinate a mix of uses in proximity to high-capacity transportation. So this isn't necessarily what's exactly right either. This is just one example of a center, a town center where jobs and homes and transportation are coordinated together. Now, I will give you two specific examples of things that are happening in our community right now. And let's start with Roy City, Weber County, just southwest of Ogden City. This is a map of the vision that Roy City developed. They were a tradition, and are still, predominantly a bedroom community, single-family residential homes. And they were struggling and thinking, how are we going to deal with growth? How are we going to make sure that our kids have a place to live, young families? And what they had to do is they said, where does it make sense for development to occur? And they focused on the Frontrunner station. Roy has a Frontrunner station running right through their community, and they said, that is a location that it makes sense for us to provide a mix of uses, housing types and jobs. And then what they said is, let's preserve the character, single-family residential, of the remainder of their community. So where matters. Now remember this, I'm going to come back to this in a little while later. Also, Sandy City, very different community, but what they said is, we're bounded by the tracks line on the east and the I-15 on the west, and between 90th South and 106th South, they have 1,000 acres. And what Sandy did is they said, this is an opportunity for us to do development in this area, mixed use. And so they created what many of you have heard of, the Cairns, where their tagline is, where mountain meets urban. And so in that area, it made sense for them to do really significant development, and then they've preserved the character of their existing community. And in fact, let me show it to you from overhead. They're building right in open space, and they're building in trails, those are the red lines, all through that area for lifestyle. Now, this way we design our communities is so important, as we know, for how much people are going to walk and are going to bike. So I'll give you an example. Some of you may have seen this before. On the left is an image of a suburban school and the access paths to that school. And you can see there's only 2 access paths. So where those red X's are, those kids, maybe they would walk to school, but it's a longer walk. So what happens? Well, maybe their parents end up driving them to school. And then on the right, you see in Daybreak with different community design, where because there's been more street connectivity, 88% of the kids are walking to school, compared to 17% in other more traditional suburban communities. Design really matters. Now, I'm just going to take a minute and show you that you can get access to all of the details of this vision through the Wasatch Choice 2050 vision. Now, this is a poster that shows our long linear community and the integration of transportation and land use throughout with a network of centers. And if you want to look in more detail, you go to our interactive website at wfrc.org, which we've developed with all of our partners. And you can do things like zoom in on Roy City, which is right in the center there. And Roy, again, they asked the question for transportation, which you can highlight here, the official transportation plans. And they said, look, there's the front runner. And look, there's the DNRG trail. So that is a place that it makes sense to do our land use, that little yellow right in the middle, a town center, where they said, let's put our land use there. And you can get information about it in the map. And they also said, how about economic development? Well, let's do a community development area right there to integrate economic development, transportation, and housing. That's what Roy City has done. So what I'm going to do is I just want to wrap this up with asking the question, what does this mean to us? What are the outcomes if we implement this vision? And I'll just tell you a few. 1, better access to job opportunities. If you live in a space, you have access to a certain number of jobs represented by those red dots within a certain area that you can travel. Well, if we invest in our transportation and spread that your access, and we also can cluster more jobs in coordination with that housing, we'll increase access. If we implement the vision, 74% increase in job opportunities, and for the average resident on the Wasatch Front, another 96,000 job opportunities. Along with that, cleaner air. This represents the actual decrease in mobile source emissions. That black line goes from 2015 to 2050. If we implement the vision, we will actually reduce our mobile source emissions by 59%. Cleaner fuel in vehicles and more transportation choices. And then for the local governments in the room, you'll save money on infrastructure. Local governments are principally responsible for roadway infrastructure and utilities. On the current path, we'll spend over $26 billion. And if we implement the vision with different development patterns, we will save over $5 billion. Now, also, you remember Tyler Norris from the last Move Utah Summit, and he told us that in terms of health outcomes, the quality of medical care is actually the smallest gear, only 10%. It's personal behaviors that represents approximately 40% of health outcomes. So if we can provide these options that we have talked about to walk and to bike, we will improve health outcomes. And also environmental and social factors, the so-called social determinants of health. If we can recognize that we have vulnerable communities in Utah with, according to Department of Workforce Services, 60,000 children living in intergenerational poverty in Utah right now. We have a moral imperative to not leave those communities behind, and an economic imperative as well to make sure that we're giving them access to jobs and to education, and that's what the vision contemplates us doing. So, with these 4 strategies and implementing the vision, I will conclude with reminding us that we can choose our path forward. You, each of you individually and working together, have the ability, and you are doing it already, and you're doing a great job. You have the ability to impact the way our community grows. We have a track record in Utah of working together, coming together to address challenges and making sure that we have a bright future. And that is what Wasatch Choice 2050 is all about. Thank you very much. Okay, so how do we do this at the local level? Let's get some information from a national and even global expert. Jason Roberts, the founder of the Better Blocks Foundation, is an artist, he's an urban designer, and his life's work has been dedicated to creating healthy, vibrant, and sustainable neighborhoods. I'm going to ask Jason to come on up. He's done a lot of work in Dallas and also many places around the world. He got the Champions of Change Award from the White House. He's been listed as one of the top 100 most influential urbanists, and we are very lucky to have him here with us today. Jason? Thank you. Thank you.
We can leave it there if you want. I can put my water on it. Yeah, I'll move around it. All right, can you guys hear me? Is my mic on? Hello, check, check. You hear me better now? Okay. Oh, is it off? Oh, hold on a second. Maybe I turned it off. Oh, I did. Good eye. All right, hear me now? Perfect. All right, first of all, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here because in Dallas, where I live right now, it's about 350 degrees outside, so this has been wonderful. So I sent pictures to all my friends wearing sweaters and said, "Look, sweater weather, suckers." So anyways, and I will say it's always surprising for people to talk about like being an expert in this field because this was not my original plan in life. And I'll talk a little bit about that here now. That's me. And there we go. This is my organization, Better Block. All right, I'll start with this image, and I start with this often. This is in Paris, in Montmartre. I remember when I first saw this image, I thought, man, I wish this was in my neighborhood. I love, the little cafe seating. I love the little streets and the landscape spilling out of the top of it. I want to live on top of this place. I want to retire here. I asked my friends, what do you think about places like this? And they said, man, we put this on postcards. We want to have our kids work in these spaces. And I said, well, if we all collectively wish we had more places that look like this, then why do we keep building places that look like this? And that was kind of the original impetus behind our work, realizing when we build things all the time, and we have decisions to make. We can make things that inspire us and that we want to fight for, and then we'll put on postcards, or things that just make us feel like a commodity and that we don't care if it goes away tomorrow. Also want to mention kind of early inspirations for me starting off. We're looking at hearing the stories of my parents' small towns in Oklahoma where they had all of their community gatherings. They all knew the local shop owners. This is their main street. They talked about having all their little parades for 4th of July and gathering together. And I remember going back for Christmases and Thanksgiving, and all I saw were these kind of empty, hollow shells of these spaces. And I thought, man, I heard all these great stories. How could we let these things go away? How do we let these things slip? And so it's trying to think about how do we bring those things back. Also started looking at places that were thousands of years old. This is in Rome, and kind of looking at these spaces like these great plazas and seeing they're full with fountains and young people and old people, and they're full of life with markets, and thinking well, how do we get back to those kind of things and these kind of places that people want to celebrate? So I said, I want to get back home to Dallas, and I want to take part and see if I can make change in my community. The problem was I wasn't an urban planner, I wasn't an architect, I was your IT guy. So I would have been setting up this presentation. I would have been plugging in those wires and everything like that. So I was not the guy that's going to inspire your community to make change. But I started going to City Hall, said I want to make change. I want to do some things in my neighborhood. And they said, well, you know what? We do all these plans. We've got downtown Dallas plans. We've got forward Dallas plans. We got bike plans from 2011 that never got built. You can pull those out and look at those for a while. We got the 2035 mobility plan. I thought, well, Dallas is going to be great in 2035, right? I hope I make it, right? So I thought, okay, I'm going to get involved with just things in my neighborhood. I want to get started right now. The first project I took on was just to give you some backstory. I live in a part of Dallas called Oak Cliff, which is on the far, kind of the southwest quadrant, and it's historically been known as the bad side of town. And part of that is for good reason, because we had some bad folks from my neighborhood. First of all, Bonnie and Clyde are from my neighborhood, and Lee Harvey Oswald is from my neighborhood. In fact, this theater is kind of ground zero for why we're thought of as the bad part of town. This is actually where Lee Harvey Oswald was captured after the assassination of JFK. In fact, the reason we have that sign is because Oliver Stone helped us build that sign for the movie JFK. And so I went to the group that was trying to run it and fix it, and they said, we want to fix this up. We need millions of dollars, but people don't want to give us money here because we're the bad side of town and has a bad history to it. I said, well, I don't have millions of dollars, but I want to take part. I want to see if I can help. I want to bring my friends together. Maybe we can just have people paint. We'll make canvases for a bunch of friends, like 100 friends, and we'll have them turn this theater into an instant art gallery, right? We'll paint one night, and the next day we'll open up the doors to the theater. And so this is kind of pictures of us inside the theater. And minutes before, we're building these easels, and minutes before we're about to open the doors, we started thinking, this is going to be an abject failure. What were we thinking? It's the middle of winter. We're in the bad side of town in a theater that's been closed for 10 years. But when we opened the doors, we had 700 people show up. People came out and said, man, we've been waiting for this theater to be open. I was like, I was waiting for someone to open the theater as well. Are we all just waiting? We all recognize the problem. We're just waiting for someone to kind of take part and tell us how to get started. And so I decided I want to keep helping. I started calling the board, say, can I get more involved? They said yes, and within 3 months, I became the president of the Texas Theater. So I tell people, be careful when you say, hey, I want to help, because they will throw the keys at you. So I started by saying, look, we don't even have a screen for film. So I found a screen in someone's backyard in the neighborhood. And we didn't have a sound system. So we found a free piano on Craigslist, brought it in the theater, started showing silent films, and had the neighbors just play piano to the silent films. And after we exhausted the whole Charlie Chaplin catalog, we had enough money to actually buy a sound system. And then we could actually start showing real features, and then it became a gathering place for our neighborhood. Now, if you go back to our neighborhood, it's working, it's robust, and it's an exciting kind of place that everyone gathers in our community. Okay, well, thinking, man, if I can help bring back the theater with my neighbors, what else can we take on? So I started looking at the library, my old maps. And so just to orient you, downtown Dallas is the top right-hand side. And so we're about 1.5 miles from that. And so this map is from 1929. I started looking at these bold black lines and trying to figure out, well, what were those lines? And I noticed that the interesting thing is, like, the Texas Theater was on that little letter says C on there. And if you look at that letter, I had 650 seats in the theater, but only 35 parking spaces. And the only reason that worked was because those bold black lines were our old trolley car network we had. So I started attending a lot of community meetings and talking about ways we could bring people back to our neighborhood. Maybe they can buy houses again. They want to start businesses. Everyone said, well, what can we do? How can we get people back? And people had a lot of ideas. Some people said, we need a Chipotle. If we get a Chipotle, everyone will move back. You know, if we get a Cheesecake Factory or a Whole Foods, everyone's going to move in. And so I said, I got an idea. Why don't we bring back that trolley car system? And people said, that's crazy. It's been gone for 50 years. It cost millions of dollars. And I knew very little about trolley cars. But since I was an IT guy, I knew how to make websites. So I went home that night. I made a fake website called the Oak Cliff Transit Authority. It looked really official. It had boards and newses and histories and pictures of European trams on the front. The next week, the Dallas Morning News did a story saying, dreaming of the day the streetcars return. That's what Jason Roberts and other members of the recently formed Oak Cliff Transit Authority are hoping. But there were no other members. But I had people call me in my neighborhood and say, we got a transit authority, this is great. And I was like, well, not really, but I'm advocating for that idea. And I had one guy that was like, who's since become a mentor, who was a civil engineer, said, I will donate 100 hours pro bono to a feasibility study. And I had another guy that was like 75 years old that had enough parts in his garage to build a trolley car. So I had actually this really interesting group of folks that I could kind of gather together and start fighting for this idea. But I thought it's going to take me 30 years. And so I'm going to work on other things I can take on in my neighborhood in the meantime. So I started thinking about the bicycle things I was seeing around the world. How can I bring more bike infrastructure back to my community? But when we talked about bicycling in Dallas, it wasn't like what I saw in Europe, which was like girls in dresses and guys in suits, like riding to the grocery store or the post office. The only way we knew how to ride bicycles and talk about celebrating bicycles was to wear a bunch of spandex, to start doping, and go 200 miles. Like, that was the only way we knew how to do it. So decided, let's create another group. We'll call it Bike Friendly Oak Cliff, celebrating the idea of everyone riding your old heavy Schwinn, out to and just pick it up and go to the grocery store together and do fun things. And I said, I'll go to City Hall and we'll advocate for this. And I'll go to City Hall and say, look, I got this great idea. We'll take all of our roads and we'll cut them in half. We'll put bicycles and bike lanes everywhere. And I found out when you're the guy that does that, you're gonna have a lot of people that look like this. They're gonna come out and say, no, you're not. So I looked at that and thought, man, it's gonna be really tough for me to get this guy on a bicycle, right? So I'm gonna have to try to figure out another option for us to do some things to get people riding. So I said, well, why don't we just have fun? We'll be irreverent with it. We'll have everybody go out and we'll do like history tours in our neighborhood. We'll go out and say like, hey, if you go, and we'll just go follow the trail of Lee Harvey Oswald, because we didn't have a lot to celebrate in my neighborhood. Thought we'll all meet at the grassy knoll and for our first ride. And we thought, if we're lucky, we'll have 20 people show up to this ride, because who's gonna ride old heavy bicycles around my neighborhood? But what happened when we actually announced that ride was we had 150 people show up. And what you don't see on this is me at the front of the line looking terrified, because first of all, I didn't own a bicycle when we started Bike Friendly Oak Cliff. I just love the idea of having a bike culture. And I also thought, I am not the leader of a bicycle movement. I'm your IT guy, right? I don't need to be leading 150 people to the bad side of town. But I found out if you're passionate about something, you have everything it takes to become a leader. And people are just waiting for someone to stand up and say, look, things are broken. We gotta make a change. We gotta do something. So I started doing little things to start promoting the culture in my neighborhood there shortly after. First of all, I said, my kids' school, no one's riding a bicycle. We heard this morning, people say how everybody rode their bikes. I rode my bike, and all my friends did in the 80s growing up, but my kids didn't even have bike racks in front of the school. So I made punch cards for the kids, and I said, look, if you guys ride your bikes for 1 week, for 5 days, I'll punch the card every day that you ride, and at the end of it, we'll go out and have root beer floats. And we had 0 kids riding when we started this, and after 5 days, we had 100 kids. And all I made was punch cards, right? So it showed it was really easy to kind of get people to think differently. And so now the interesting thing is, if you go back to my neighborhood, you'll see it took a while for this to start developing, but a lot of their younger brothers and sisters said, we want to learn how to ride. And these kids that weren't learning to ride bikes until they were 9 or 10 years old, which is crazy, because when we were kids, it was 3, 4, and 5 when you were learning to ride. So now all their kid brothers and sisters said, we want to learn how to ride earlier now. And so we started seeing this kind of collective change happen over time within our community. All right. I was working on the theater, I'm working on the trolley car, I'm working on bicycles. I started looking at the blocks of buildings and saying, how do we fix these things, right? These had been closed down for a while, and we'd done a lot of things to hurt them over time. So first of all, we had changed the sidewalks, thinned them out. We'd made the roads one-way, high-speed streets to get people out to the suburbs faster. We changed the zoning from retail to light industrial, and that's because we didn't have any parking. And then you have to read this, but we had a lot of laws and rules that either made it illegal or cost prohibitive to bring this place back to life. So just know we had, if you wanted flowers on the sidewalk, $1,000 in permitting. You wanted a shade awning over every window, $1,000 per window. Street cafes, we're gonna be $1,000 times area, times market value, times 85%, times 12%. I have no idea what that is. We had a law that says it's illegal for us to have merchandise on the sidewalk. So those cool things like you saw, like clothes racks in front of the vintage clothing store, or bicycles in front of the bike shop, that was illegal. And then if you really want to kill your street life, create a law that says it's illegal for crowds to gather on the sidewalk. And we had that as well. And all those rules were from 1941. So I went back to the city and said, well, why did we create all these things? They're like, we don't know, you're just gonna have to follow those rules. I said, well, obviously it's illegal for us to do anything to bring this place back to life. So what would happen if we took a weekend and we broke every law we possibly could? So that's what we did. We painted our own bike lanes. We added our own cafe seating. We put string lights across the street. We put murals in the buildings. We took the empty buildings and put the businesses we always wanted: bookstores, coffee shops, flower shops. And then we printed off all those laws and rules we were breaking. We put them in the windows, and we invited our city staff and our mayor and said, come out to our better block. And they came out and we thought, man, we're all going to go to jail, right? And they were like, I don't know if we're supposed to be here, right? But what happened was they saw hundreds of people from the neighborhood out having a great time. They saw the buildings working again. They saw people riding bikes. And they said, you know what, this makes a lot of sense. We need more places like this, not less. We should maybe embrace these ideas. And we just did it temporarily. We wanted to try this idea. We took it all down after the weekend. But we were just really showing people that there was another way that we could do things to make a better community. And then now if you go back, so we got a lot of laws and rules changed after that project. First of all, we got all the zoning unanimously voted back to retail within months after that. And then after that, we started seeing all those buildings that were empty within months started getting leased out by locals. People said, that's great, but you didn't when it was nice outside. And everyone blames weather on why you can't do great things in your community. So in our community, it's heat, right? That's what we deal with. But I know, you guys probably deal with cold weather here, but if you look in Sweden, if you look in Denmark, what they've done in cold weather, how they've embraced it. rainy climates like Portland, how they've embraced their environment. And for me, I was referencing Austin and New Orleans that were hot climates. And so I took another block and said, let's try it when it's 100 degrees out. We'll take this block. If you look at it, it had it was this gray, cold, no sidewalks on one side, broken up sidewalks on the other. There's a pole with nothing on it. There's just kind of this ugliness, right? This soul-crushing space. So we went out in the middle of the night with our neighbors and we brought out 42 trees. We've got 100 bushes to create pedestrian islands. We took out old pallets from the trash and we made decks so people could sit outside. We painted our own crosswalks. You're not supposed to do that. We added bicycles to that pole because, first of all, we were just telling people we were the bike part of town now. The funny thing is it just started becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. So when you keep telling people you're something, it's amazing how that starts getting reinforced within your community. And then lastly, we put tables under the trees, and people came out and they would not leave. They're calling their friends, they have baby strollers, and they're saying, you gotta get out here, this looks like Vancouver, it doesn't look like Dallas. In fact, this is what the block looked like afterwards. So the funny thing is, this is not a rendering, but it looks like several of the renderings we saw from architects that would come to our neighborhood telling us how great our place could be. But we stopped believing them after a while. We started saying we're suffering from rendering fatigue because they're never getting built. So the beauty of this project was, we took the time and energy it takes to draw pictures, and we just made it happen. Those are real trees. They're not Photoshop trees. Real crosswalks, real bicycles on a 100-degree day that people came out from my neighborhood and used. And the beautiful thing is we did it just temporarily, and we took it down afterwards. So people would come out the next weekend with their friends, like, you got to check out this great block. It's right around here somewhere. There were trees. There were shops. Like, what happened? So one of the big initiatives we found within our work was to take the city of Dallas's motto, which is think big. And our frustration with think big meant, like, what we're going to do is we're going to hire an Italian architect. We're going to spend $150 million. We're going to design a bridge that looks like a fish skeleton that we hope makes 100 little things happen in our community. But I said, I found that the places that I love in the world, whether it's in London or Paris, here in Salt Lake City, wherever it is, are these little blocks that I love to go to that have 100 little things, like little cafes, little flower shops. I keep going back to Ava's Bakery because it's so good. I just go in, they have little pocket parks, they have directories, they have, trees, these things that we can do as a community. It's not so hard when you start looking at these places that we love to be in and understanding maybe it's not those iconic landmarks, but it's these small spaces that we can create as a community. And I found you can use cheap things at the hardware store to start making people think differently about their built environment. So first of all, white duct tape looks just like the thermoplastic paint that you all use to paint stripes on the ground, right? I can go to the dollar store, I can take trash cans, I can reclad them to look like planters and bollards. I can take the old scraps of advertisements off our city buses and make crosswalks. Then I go to the city and say, this intersection you built here is too wide, it's too fast, cars are rushing through here. And they're saying, well, okay, we can fix it, it's gonna take us years and millions of dollars, and we'll say, don't worry about it, we'll take care of it on Saturday. The amazing thing was the city came out and looked at this and said, man, this makes a lot of sense. We're getting real-time data. We're not making these presumptions on traffic data. We're seeing how the curb radii are working. If they don't work, we just modify it quickly on the fly. We just change the tape, right? And then we start seeing all the real estate we've recaptured that we can put small businesses on within our communities and our neighborhoods. People always ask me, like, how did you get by with breaking all those laws and rules in broad daylight? I said, I found out you can break any rule you want as long as you wear an orange vest. Right. So the funny thing is, so our work started getting sanctioned, right? So it started off as this kind of poke the city in the eye, they don't understand our needs kind of things. And what happened was I had a lot of people in the city say, we believe in this. This actually makes a lot of sense. And we want to actually start adopting these ideas. And we started getting hired by the city of Dallas, and then by other cities around the state, and then all over. And so I'm going to give you an example of a project that's like many of the projects we have to show you now how we start this work. We'll go out to a community, and we've gone from every context, rural, suburban, inner city, urban, you name it. This is kind of a suburban area, but suburban built 1920s, 30s. This is Akron, Ohio. And the struggle that they faced was, much like Detroit, this is where the tires were all made for the cars that we all drive. This is the headquarters. So Goodrich, BF Goodrich, Goodyear, all those guys were based here. We looked at the spaces and said, okay, well, once those industries left, they're faced with depopulation, excess housing, empty building stock, streets that were overbuilt, and they're trying to figure out, like, how do we get people to come back here and want to be in these places? So we look at, well, who's there now? There are people there that we can engage and ask them, what do they see? What do they remember that used to be there? How can we bring those things back? How do we make these places we can celebrate again? And we start walking around the blocks and look at these empty buildings and saying, okay, this is an old theater. What can we do with this? Who owns this building? We start walking around the streets and say, how do we modify those? And we start making maps and we start saying, okay, here's the empty buildings. And these are the people in the neighborhood that have always wanted to start a business. So there's a guy, here's Joe who wants to do a coffee shop. Here's Judy who wants to do her clothing store. We start looking at the streets and say, how do we shrink those and make those more accommodating for more modes of transit? How do we take the gaps in between the buildings and make those quality public spaces as well? And then we go to the city's public works department, we fill up their official equipment with kids' finger paint, and we take kids from the neighborhood and we line those with that duct tape, and within 2 hours we can have bike lanes like the ones I saw in New York and Portland that Akron thought they could never have. And then we can line those with shade trees as well. We can take those scraps at the city buses and we make mid-block crossings. The city that said that'll never work. And we're like, we'll show you it actually does work. It's funny how the presumptions are, well, if you change the built environment, cars aren't going to understand what to do and they're just going to start hitting everybody and everything that's around, right? That always happens. And so it's going to be Carmageddon, right? And the reality is, like, we don't respond that way. But the presumption is like, well, people aren't used to this. They've been used to another way. But if you see a parked car in the street, you don't just slam into the back of it, right? Or maybe you do, I don't know. But it's funny how that's the assumptions we make. So we build our environments based on worst case scenarios. And so the problem is we're constantly dodging and trying to make these, what I call these hybrid environments that are trying to take account of like, well, how do we make a lot of cars fit in, a lot of people? But what happens is we're making the futons of cities, right? They're not comfortable for sitting or sleeping, right? So this is other examples of how we transform spaces, and this is a few other projects we've done. This is an old bank building, and they were like, well, how do we fix this? And we had a bunch of tires and paint we found, so we made a plaza for them. We took another building, another space that was an empty lot, and we said, okay, we got some soil, we got some volunteers, and with a couple hours, we made an Italian plaza for them to show them how they can have a quality public space. This is just duct tape and finger paint, showing how we can make a better intersection. So kind of coming full circle and back to the story on health, and which I want to say, it was so heartening to hear Carlos give the opening keynote. I've never heard a DOT say, what about quality of life? Like, that blew my mind. So that is so awesome. That is so inspirational. You guys are so lucky. And we are in a totally different place. So 10 years ago, we were not having this conversation. In fact, I had never thought I would be having this conversation in front of a DOT. So this is amazing that we're here. So I'm going to tell you about a community that's kind of has an interesting data point that we had to learn about. Because when we talk about the health of places and the health of communities, oftentimes people think about the diet, or they think about exercise, or we're talking about getting them to walk more. But there's a community called Roseto in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And it was an old little Italian community that had set up. And with this community, they were trying to figure out, there's a doctor that went in and said, like, look, we've seen all over the country, whenever there's high blood pressures, we're seeing more heart attacks happening. But and this one guy said, this doctor said, I'm in this one city called Roseto, though, and this community, they have a lot of high blood pressure, and they are not having heart attacks. They're living these long lives. And they're trying to study them and find out what's going on. Well, it has to be because they're eating a Mediterranean diet. And so they start studying their diet, like, no, they're eating the same greasy, bad pork sandwiches that we all eat, right? And they're smoking cigars. And like, well, they have to be walking and exercising more. And they're like, well, they're not really actually doing that. So when they started breaking it down, they realized that the community was heavily socially connected. They all felt like they were being looked after, like people were looking out for them, their community was helping them, that they were all in it together. And they felt this sense of connection. And if you realize, we are social beings. We're no different than dogs that run in packs. You should isolate them from other dogs. They're going to start getting sick, and they're going to get ill. We get ill as well. We see all of these data points for loneliness as we get older and lack of connection that we always talk about. It looks like all of these pop psychology studies that we're looking at are all talking about, really in the end, why we're not connecting as humans together. And so they studied this and found out, well, that's a vital part of being a human, and we have an ability to affect that through the way we design our cities, so people can have these interesting, spontaneous interactions together. So I'll give a little more examples of how we look at these spaces. So, we'll look at the streets, and this is in Duluth. In Duluth, said it gets really cold, Duluth, Minnesota. And so how do we make this a place that people want to gather even in the cold? So we studied places in Sweden, and we said, okay, they bring out fire pits, and they bring out, hot blankets for people, and they serve hot chocolate and mulled wine. And so we went out, and we designed a space for the community to come together and enjoy this place that nobody would ever want to be. And this is right on the edge of a neighborhood, so the neighborhood could come together and have this gathering point. This was an empty field that someone said, well, what can you do with this space? And so there was these old pecan trees. And so we just put up some string lights, took some shipping containers, opened them up to turn them, cut them out holes and out of them, and made bars and food service spaces, put out hammocks and tables and chairs. This is, we had a group, this was maybe 3 weeks ago, it was in Milwaukee, and they wanted to have places for their kids to play. And we're talking about how we design playgrounds now, and kind of our frustration that, well, they're really designed with these big, giant, garish red and blue plastic facilities that, but how do we get back to something that feels natural and more passive? And so we took this empty lot and we brought out a bunch of logs and we put them together and mulched around it. And it became this beautiful natural playscape that was passive and just stayed after the project. So people still use this now in this community. This was a drainage ditch in Richardson, Texas. This project was about 4 months ago. And they said, well, how would you make this a place that people want to engage with? So we just made bridges so people could cross and put out some shade trees and created a path. Just to show a small area how this could be a place that people could want to gather and linger. This was the backs of buildings that nobody ever even thought about engaging. This was in Toronto. This was about, I want to say this was in July. We did this project. So this is the Danforth neighborhood, just showing how we can make it more multimodal, how we can make it actually more playful and more fun. This was also in Milwaukee about 3 weeks ago, a project we did, showing how we can redesign those spaces as well. And we designed platforms for buses to make it even more ADA accessible in these spaces, landscape the area. This is the before and after. So the interesting thing is we work with the business as well to show how they can engage the space. So I tell people what you don't realize with these streets, there's a way that they actually engage the land use in a way that catalyzes it and makes it even work even better. So oftentimes the businesses in the beginning say, I don't want to lose my parking and it's going to be, end of my business as I know it. But we can show them if you make the place, if you take away part of the car environment and you replace what you've taken away with irresistible pedestrian environment, not just plain old pedestrian environment, irresistible pedestrian environment, people are going to complain, and they're going to say, I'm never going to go there, the parking's too hard. But if you make it beautiful, they will go there. They'll just keep complaining about it, but they'll walk a little further to get there at that point, which is important. You guys might know this Better Block in Salt Lake City here, just a couple weeks ago, taking this street and transforming it into this. In fact, I think there's a workshop. You guys can go out and take part in this. Has it already taken place, or it will take place? This afternoon at 4 o'clock, so you can go see this intersection and see how it was transformed. So there was a talk about rural communities. I want to talk a little bit about rural communities as well, because we've done projects in all kinds. There you go. Yes, rural people. This is a town of Millbank, South Dakota, 5,000 people. And they were like, well, how do we make this a place that people want to come back to? Their main street had died, and they're like, we're only 5,000 people. And I said, well, let's get people around tables and ask them, like, well, what do you want to see? What did the place used to look like? And they talked about their parades, and they talked about how they used to have ice skating rinks. And people kept bringing up how they used to have this little popcorn stand. It was Tommy's popcorn stand. It was an old veteran that was disabled. They'd all go to Tommy's little shack and buy their candy and buy their popcorn and gather. And this was very meaningful to this community. And so we were talking about ways that they can start bringing life back and start re-engaging these places. Somebody said, you know what? I actually have Tommy's old popcorn stand in my backyard. So they found that old stand, and they pulled it out, they painted the stand, so people could actually use it again, and they parked it in front of the ice skating rink that they brought back for their community that had been gone for 30 years. So at this point, when you go back to Milbank, South Dakota, all kinds of fun things have happened. They've got small businesses again. They're starting to do events and program the area, and they're realizing that, look, they have all the ingredients that they had before to make a great place. They just changed their mindset and thought that they couldn't do these things. And once they realized if we just reorganize ourselves as a community, we could probably make the place that we've always dreamed of. And so now, Better Block is a nonprofit. Betterblock.org, you can go to our website, you can download all the recipes for the designs that we have. You can go download our green bike lane recipes and our Italian plaza recipes. We've started getting full circle back into my IT world as well. One of the problems we faced in the work was when you're looking at a city block as a constraint, Well, it can be pretty large, and filling in that space can take a lot of time and a lot of energy. So I needed to be able to design things that could be quickly replicated at scale inexpensively. And so I started looking at new technology and trying to figure out, well, what's out there that I can embrace to help us build these spaces out with our communities. And I found, if I look to digital fabrication, you guys might think of 3D printing when you hear digital fabrication. We use something called a CNC router. So imagine just a printer for plywood. You put a sheet of plywood on it, you download files, it cuts out these shapes, and you can make all kinds of cool stuff that you can puzzle piece together with those shapes. And so we've designed a library called the WikiBlock Library that you guys can go and download these files for free and start doing these community engagement projects where you take these files and you go to a makerspace and you can make things like this pretty quickly. These are just examples of the chairs that we have and benches. But what those files look like is you download the file, it looks like this is called a cut file. You put the plywood on the CNC machine, and these exist everywhere. I can tell you there's probably 4 within a mile radius of us right now. They're oftentimes in maker spaces or fab labs that we all have access to and can use. They're basically libraries that you can check out the usage of these machines. But you download the files, you have the machine start cutting this out, you go have a cup of coffee, come back in 45 minutes, and you could have 2 chairs and a table that you assemble with no glue, screws, or nails. It all puzzle pieces together. So I thought, man, if we can do this in 45 minutes, make 2 chairs and a table, imagine what you can do in a week with your city block. So we have designs for bus stops that you can download. We have bike racks you can download and start filling in those spaces. We've got community gardens. We've got greenhouses. We've got bleachers, so you can start making those baseball fields again, or the outdoor community theater spaces. We can turn parking lots into putt-putt courses. We can, We've got these, this is actually, we're releasing this next week in Chattanooga. We're working with Project for Public Spaces, and we designed a trapezoid bench that you can download. And you can make all these interesting configurations with this trapezoid bench. We've got band shells you can download. This is one of my staff. We've got a parklet you can download and assemble. We worked with Ford Motor Company on this originally because they're looking at their effect on the built environment now, especially with the advent of potential for autonomous vehicles and things like that. So they're realizing we can recapture public spaces and make them more for people. So this is, again, a parklet, so you can sit and wait for your ride share on this, or you can have a cafe seating experience. And then we can get pretty big with the technology. We made a 50-foot long and 12-foot tall barn, and then we got really crazy and said, "Hey, let's make a geodesic dome," because we had too much time on our hands. So the interesting thing is, though, the kids in your neighborhood know how to use this technology even better than we do. As you know, anybody who has kids out here know that they can use their phones better than you can. They can tap into all these things. And so the nice thing is we'll go to the high schools now, they'll download our files, and they'll start modifying them and making them better and drawing their names into them and all kinds of things. And they'll go to their school courtyards and start fixing their courtyards. And it gives a chance for these kids to realize where before they thought they could never help adapt their built environment. That seemed too far-fetched. But we designed it in a way to where it's simple to assemble, and they absolutely can help transform these spaces and have these conversations on why it's important for us to be doing this stuff in the first place. And that first Better Block I did back in April 2010, a lot of people started calling me and said, "Hey, man, we want a better block in our neighborhood." And I was like, "Well, I'm an IT consultant. I don't really have time. I got a full-time job. But I'll make an open source guide so anybody else who wants to can download our files and learn what we did." And so within the first year, it went all over the country. In the second year, it went all the way around the world. So it went from Melbourne, Australia to Tehran, Iran. I tell people, when people from Tehran, Iran call me and ask me about breaking laws, I was like, "I don't know about breaking laws in Tehran, Iran." I think your stakes may be a little higher. All right, I'll go back to the trolley car story. Can I tell you what happened with this? This is part of my board. We had about 5 people total. We only raised about $500 as an organization as we're getting this off the ground. And we're studying, streetcars. And this is us in Portland. And we met with their officials and they're like, "Yeah, it's tough. It'll take you 30 years. It took a lot of arrows, but it's worth it. Just keep plugging away at it." And so we went back home and we started looking for ways that we could implement this. We found a grant. It was a new federal grant, the first year it had ever been created, called the Tiger Grant. Talked to the city of Dallas, said, "Hey, we want to apply for this Tiger Grant." And they laughed at us and said, "All right, Oak Cliff Transit Authority, apply for all the grants you want." Yeah. We had a 0.3% chance of getting any money whatsoever. But what happened was we won. We won millions of dollars. And instead of taking 30 years to bring back our streetcar, we did it in 5. And all I did was make a website. So I tell people what this did for the next 100 years to the built environment in my community is amazing. We have all of these buildings that are coming up now. In fact, I should include more pictures because there's so many that have been created. We have places now people can live that they didn't live before. These were brownfields in our community. I started getting a lot of attention. People started saying, hey, let's create this organization and bring you guys out and help us with our community. So we started saying, we found these quick ways to make things happen in our own neighborhood. We decided to make a restaurant with our friends because we thought, wait, we can make restaurants. I got to lecture at Harvard. I got to have dinner with the First Lady. We were in the Venice Biennale, which is like the Oscars for architects. So all my architect friends were like, that's not fair. I decided to run for U.S. Congress because I had a free April. So we had all these really cool things that could happen to us, right? Thought, what can stop us? We found all these ways to make a lot of change quickly in our community, right? Nothing can stop us, right? But the one thing that completely stopped me was in 2012, I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. And everything stopped. And at that point, I thought, man, what was all this stuff for? I'm not going to get to watch my kids grow up. I'm not going to get to ride the trolley car we helped bring back. I'm not going to get to take part in these little businesses and ride these bike lanes. And when I was at my sickest and could barely move, neighbors that helped me with the better block started knocking on my apartment door and saying, hey, I want to take your daughter out to go shopping. I want to take your son to go fishing. And we want to fill up your fridge with food to help you. Because in the end, we don't need better blocks. We want to help make a better community. And we want to help build a better Jason if we can as well. So, thank you. So I tell people what I got out of all this work. It wasn't trolley cars. It wasn't bike lanes. It wasn't coffee shops. And that's great. Those are all great things, right? They're byproducts of a healthy community. What I got was a neighborhood. And that's why you're all doing everything you're doing. That's why all of you guys are here right now. That's the effect you have on a place with the work that you do. And so I come back home, and it's like Cheers. Everyone knows your name, and it's like, and they know your kids, and you look after each other. And I got all that stuff that my parents had, and it's amazing. And before I forget, because I often will forget, in 2014, I was diagnosed as being cancer-free, so I'm going to be just fine. But ultimately, in the end, I do feel like it is important for everyone to know that you have this amazing opportunity to use the tools and the resources you have to make the places that people never imagined they could have, the places that they saw on postcards, the places that they always thought, like, man, I'll go to vacation and go to this place. I can't imagine that this could actually be my city block. So that's a really exciting opportunity, and I challenge all of you guys to take that up and help fix these places. Thank you. Any time? Oh, okay. We have time for Q&A. Did I go really quick? Okay, good. Does anybody have any questions? I guess you can walk up to the... Hello? I just overwhelmed. Like, oh my God, it's too much. I can tell you the questions I usually get, which are almost always like liability related. So I tell people, well, we take out event permits and we take out additional insured, and we use the block party, this block party permit constraint that up and helps. Okay, question over here.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your message. Fantastic, very inspirational. Another inspiration in my life is Jane Jacobs, and she advocates that new ideas require old places. I'm currently working for a community that is gone from 1,000 to 55,000 in 20 years. Wow. And so we're dealing with new places. Yeah. I'm curious, have you had to work within newer communities are struggling with very similar problems, but don't have old places for these very creative ideas?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, so like I mentioned before, we've worked in pretty much every context you can imagine. Those are tricky. I mean, And because you do need these. The nice thing is new places do eventually become old places. So it is important for us to start building as much as we can in those places that's going to be these legacy style developments and think about those. I would say, if anything, and this is I think where you guys have a major impact, was one of my mentors told me, honestly, if you get the street wrong, everything else is wrong. And so the one advice I would have is to realize that, if you build the 8-lane road, you're going to have the type of development that goes beside an 8-lane road, right? Which is, I'm not saying if that's good or bad, but you're going to get these big box stores and you have these large separations. And we all know this retail environment that we're dealing with now, because of Amazon and things like that, means that you can't really build these big places anymore, because there's not tenants that can afford to pay those leases on those spaces, especially when they're new. So we're going to have to get back to getting compact and small again, which I think that's a great opportunity. That's pretty exciting for us. So really, when you're now at this point, it's going to be talking to this community. They're building a town from the ground up. Imagine, at one point, every city started off with 100 people and went to 50,000 or something like that at some point in time. But they had these interesting, flexible spaces they could try out all their ideas in. And when I was in Duluth, one of the struggles they had, where they had these large stone buildings and the population had decreased, and there were these beautiful, gorgeous, kind of like the buildings you have on your main street here in Salt Lake City. And I said, and they couldn't find anybody who could lease these spaces. And I said, the problem was, the people that created those stone buildings got to iterate up to get to that point. They started off in Duluth when there were just a bunch of wood houses and wood structures, like the old West town. And they started their little businesses, and they got a little more successful. They did the brick building. And as they did the brick building, that got more successful, more people came in, they did the stone buildings. So I would say the important thing is to look at the spaces you have in these places, and how do you maintain this flexibility to allow them to be iterative? So people can come in and test out these ideas, come out and do a little market. Joe can try his cafe idea out in a market space, and Linda can try out, again, her clothing store or things like that. And hopefully they can scale up and help build these big places that we need.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So obviously you've been really successful with this concept, and there's a tremendous amount of demand for it now. And you've sort of expanded into new ideas and new products, and I'm wondering how you guide that growth so that you're not just constantly running around the country responding to people who want better blocks, but how do you identify what you're going to do next and keep your eye on that prize?
Yeah, I will say all of our work started off with just these temporary, very ephemeral projects, right? Using plywoods or pallets and things like that. What's been happening now with time is, all we're doing is looking at these places that we love anywhere in the world and trying to reverse engineer. What is it I love about this place, and how do we do this? So we are now getting into semi-permanents and permanents. We're starting a social impact business, designing, fabricating placemaking furniture, things like that, because no one has really said, how do we build the things that we need that really create place? Right now we're just using these off-the-shelf things, but these are things that should be custom to a place, right? They should take in the vernacular and the culture and the history, and we can use these technologies to help identify what those things are and help kind of construct these things that we need to fill in these spaces. But I will say, if anything, we are understanding, and we're starting to develop kind of more of a manifesto around our work, tying ourselves to an ethos, saying, looking at really the environment itself, what does the environment look like in the future? What have we done to it? And how do we start to undo some of the damage that we've done? I think there's an exciting opportunity. I was just speaking in Florida, and some folks I talked with there had just met with their DOT and talked about how there's an opportunity for us to look at in the return on investment that it comes when you create these smaller spaces, and this idea of we're going to have another recession. Everyone talks about it at some point. It always happens, right? And what we're all going to do is we're all going to do these giant infrastructure projects, that means we're typically going to add more lanes. Everyone's looking at these ribbon-cutting projects. But I think there's a great opportunity for us to usher in this era of infrastructure projects that are scaling back what we did in the past. So we can retrofit these spaces. That is a massive infrastructure project to be had on its own. There's an industry that can be built around that. And so there's jobs that can be built around that. But again, I think our mindset right now is let's just make it new and shiny as opposed to let's take it back and figure out what that looks like. So that's where our work is leading to too. How do we, codify some of these ideas, and how do we start helping communities look at that potential for scaling back these spaces for their communities? So, any other questions? So up back here.
Jason, thank you for being here. I think we're kindred spirits. It was amazing. I'm from Texas as well, so maybe there's something in the water down there.
Howdy.
So we had, kind of a similar thing. We got a streetcar built here in Salt Lake, down in South Salt Lake, Sugar House area. And it started as like yours did, as a real people movement. We had 400 or 500 people coming out, kind of encouraging the city, hey, we could really use this. We got a Tiger grant like you did, I think it was around the same time, and built that. At some point, the city kind of took it over and said, we got this. We don't need the community to kind of tell us what to do next. And it lost all of its momentum. And so right now we have an incomplete streetcar because it ends in a place that's nowhere. And we're trying to kind of get that community back into it. But I'd love to get your perspective on how do you sustain, once you get positive things moving, there is a tendency for kind of the civic mechanism, the bureaucracy to kind of take things over and say, we know where you're going, we got this, let us take it and get it there. Because I think you can lose a lot when you lose the power of the people, the populace behind these, the energy that got them going in the first place. You need that to sustain. I'd love to get your thoughts about that.
Yeah, actually, it's a great question because I think we've struggled with that as well because we'll go into these communities and do these better blocks and sometimes like, what do we do now? And for the first couple of years, we were like, well, I just kind of keep putting the gas on, I guess, and like kind of trying to make these ideas semi-permanent or permanent to the project. What we've been getting more into though now is actually creating organized bodies around these project areas. So specifically, we do a lot of CDC development, community development, corporation development. And we'll take the people that were kind of the initial, what we call our strike team, and then we'll give them roles on this quasi-governmental board within the community to maintain the ideas that came out of this. What was the ethos that we started this with? What is the vision ultimately? And how are we holding ourselves accountable to that? So I think the answer to that question is for us to formalize these bodies around this. Otherwise, there is that tendency to be like, okay, well, they got it, we're good. And they just kind of hand that off, and you'll see this. The city is going to look at this in probably at a regional level, at completely different eyes than the neighborhood itself, and understands intimately how this can engage and make better places. So the best example I have is to actually organize the communities around you and continue giving them kind of developing. The nice thing is like we can land bank with these CDCs. They can do programming and administration, all kinds of things. Continue doing fundraising, working with the schools, doing the bike rides with the schools, all those programming activities that make it fun for people to stay engaged and continue to learn why this stuff is important. Thank you. Yes.
So I have a very logistical question, which is when you put in these temporary blocks that are only there for 2 days, what happens after? I mean, presumably duct tape comes up, but you still have to power wash the paint, and I'm presuming you've got some place to store all these pallets and whatnot. Yeah. What was the logistics of afterwards?
Yeah, it varies in every project, and I will say now we are starting, part of the reason why we like to do the temporary, why we do these 2 or 3 days, is because I found within communities there's this fear of permanency. When you say, hey, we want to make this change, and you guys all know what happens is you're going to get every worst case scenario on why this is a horrible idea. And then everyone is afraid that you're taking the public good, millions of dollars, and you're using it in a way that's, again, going to derail life as they know it. So that is the value of that 2 or 3 day. I want to also add that now communities are seeing that this is actually valuable to do in a longer time frame, and also to trying to get the data points we want. We need this out for 2 or 3 months because we know that if we want to see pass through traffic leave, we need to have more time on the ground. So we're using materials that are actually a little bit more resilient, that last a little longer. It's been interesting though. Every project we've done that's been just a 2 or 3 day project, people from the community all want to keep the things that we've created. So the pallet, like if we do pallet furniture, like I'll go back in any community I've been in, I'll see it in front of a restaurant somewhere. And there's a story behind it and they love it. And it's funny because it doesn't get tagged like the city furniture. If it does, everyone gets mad, like we built that, even though it's like, this is cheap and it's, it's really simple. So there's a connection to that stuff that was made. But yeah, it's been interesting. I think I've never had an instance where anything we've created didn't find a home afterwards. I will say that, yeah, there have been instances where we maybe used some paint that we thought would be easy to come up and was a little harder to come up, was still there slightly after projects. So we've gotten better at identifying what paints are better for that. We're trying out one right now actually in Richardson, Texas, that you use a caustic to remove it afterwards. And so I'll give you feedback on how well that's gonna work here because we literally just my team's out there striping it now. But that's the kind of the, it'd be interesting because I am seeing, you're probably seeing, we're hedged under the umbrella of tactical urbanism. And so now you're starting to see NACTO and other guides start adding this idea that they're sanctioning tactical urbanism and kind of getting involved with the materials that you can use that are good for that. So I'm belaboring the answer you were asking, but it's all found a home for some reason, which has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
How do you deal with the liability issues with design on those intersections when you're putting in crosswalks, you're putting in radiuses, and all the legalistic aspect?
Yeah, good question. So the liability question. So, I mean, first of all, we work very closely with transportation departments and engineering departments. Oftentimes, we're honestly just pulling off the plans they already have on the shelf that they've already done, because there's been so many comp plans. And so what's been nice when we're brought out to a community, oftentimes they've had a lot of consultants, and they're like, oh, another consultant. We're like, no, we're a little different. We're going to be swinging hammers within 100 days, and that's pretty jarring. So we're going to pull off some of those ideas that already exist. But on the liability side, again, we'll take out event insurances and permits, and that's how we get around that. But also the cities now are applying their insurances as well with these projects. And again, we're designing, really, like you saw some of these, the early iterations of the project, we were still kind of learning. And so now we're applying best practices and building better buffers. So if a car does hit something, it will actually be a deflection and not be it won't create a missile that shoots off and things like that. So it's working with the cities closely, working with engineering transportation departments, and getting their buy-off and using the existing plans that are there and using their insurances along with our own.
So the city kind of absorbs that liability a little bit.
Yeah.
They brought you in.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
I think one of the criticisms of tactical urbanism is that sometimes people feel it's somewhat tone deaf to classically underrepresented parts of the community.
Mm-hmm.
How does your organization kind of deal with that
Yeah.
component?
That's a good question. And usually it's brought up by just saying, what about gentrification? And that's probably, and what I say, I don't have the antidote to that. I don't want to say that I do, but where I feel like this is a better answer than any other answer I've seen out there is it's a bottom-up process. We go to those communities. So when you saw that Italian plaza, that was born out of Italians in the neighborhood. And we saw all these Italian fraternal orders. So we were building things that were designed off of the culture. And we tell people, when we go to a site, we never know what's going to get created. We don't walk in the door and be like, you guys need this, this, and this. We've done a lot of projects, so I have ideas. But we only build what the community tells us to build. We will put some expertise into the streetscape itself because the community isn't probably experts on how to design multimodal facilities. So that's a little different. And then also too, when you ask a community, you have to be careful of that because, and you guys probably know this, if I ask a community, like, what do you want? One of the things they will say often is I need ubiquitous parking, and I need fast traffic flow. But we found, there's two maxims to creating great places. First of all, it's hard to find parking in great places, and traffic flow is poor in great places. The two things that we do as a city oftentimes is try to deconstruct those things and say, well, let's still make traffic go fast and put parking everywhere. And we're like, well, why isn't this working? I don't understand why people don't want to be here. So that is the one thing that we have to kind of tilt our head and be like, I know a community will say they want these things, but this is one of those things that we know is important in order to create place. We have to stitch people back together and get them closer. But the things that we design and we make, I didn't include it, but like we worked in a refugee community. It was a Bhutanese community, and we started helping the community that was there, working with the local grocers, working with the local kind of tailors, and trying to figure out how can we design more businesses that work symbiotically with the community that's here. And then we bought a house there, and we turned the house into a cultural center. So the ground floor, it's called the Exchange House. You can look at this project. The ground floor is a cultural center, so the community can meet more of the Bhutanese refugees. It's a Bhutanese cultural center. The second floor is an Airbnb, so it have a revenue-generating component, so people can actually meet the community and stay and live in these places, or stay in the places temporarily. And the third floor is the office for the CDC itself that helps continue kind of maintaining the ideas and the visions that come out of the community. So again, when we create those CDCs too with the community, that's all baked in around the idea of what do you guys want? What is your vision for the area? So again, I don't want to come in and say, this is the answer, but I will say it's the only process that I've seen that really goes hand in hand with a community that's there. And it won't work. And we tell people this will completely fail if the community doesn't have buy-in on this work. Yes? Oh, yeah. So the question is, have you gone into rural communities where they have these wide streets, and have you been able to actually create these road diets and got buy-in on that idea? We absolutely have. There's lots of projects where that's one of the first things that we have to kind of let them know, that in order to make this stuff work again, we're going to have to bring you guys closer together at this point. Fortunately, we've done enough projects. We've done, over 100 projects. So I've got enough case studies I can show. And we can say, hey, call the folks in Aberdeen or in Millbank or in Ottumwa, Iowa. And you can learn, you can hear what they've done and the organizations they've created after this work and those things. And so I think we're not in the realm that we were 10 years ago. I think there's now more buy-in to the premise that this stuff does work, fortunately. Yes, sir.
Hi, you've shown a lot of really great before and after photos and examples of these pop-up projects, a vacant field into this great vibrant space. But obviously these are just temporary proof of concepts. Yeah. And it sounds like you've had a lot of success changing people's minds on what will work, but do you have good examples of, after the project leaves, then a permanent reemergence of the concept on the ground? Or is it mostly just policy change that you're kind of impacting, and then it kind of has to grow longer term into a permanent solution? Yeah, no, it's so we hit a lot of things with a better block. Where obviously we're hitting transportation, economic development, we're hitting health of a community. And so I will say, out of every project, something typically sticks. Like, people plant the trees afterwards. Like, we got to have these. Or we'll see small businesses that'll get created on the block that were part of a pop-up. Or maybe they won't use that block. They'll be like, but these ideas are good. They're not great here. We want to use some of this other block over here. We actually have data points on our website that shows kind of the percentage of several case studies of work that we've done. It's, I'm sorry, I'm derailing myself. Question, the last part of that question was again? Sorry. Just examples of more permanent.
Yeah. So if you go to our website, you can kind of see more examples of that. So we have, again, you can see, and also I say some more examples of something that's been interesting that's happened is there's been a lot of Better Block chapters that have been set up in cities. So if you go to Portland, one of the most successful ones I've ever seen, it's called Better Block PDX. And they work directly with the city to go and test new designs for infrastructure pretty regularly. Better Block KC in Kansas City is also very successful. There's a Better Block Springfield, Missouri. There's quite a few of these popping up, and that's been it's been a mix of, there's been policy change, there's been small business been on the ground, we were now seeing some cities go like, look, these ideas that you guys pulled out of the community through this process of engaging and asking questions like, what do you want, what's missing, what don't you like, what would make it safer? We're hearing things that we've heard in the past. Let's go ahead and apply some of these ideas permanently during the Better Block. So we've actually seen the Better Block be an excuse to do the things they've always wanted to do in the first place. It just zeroed in on a very site-specific area and made it very easy for them to do that. And it also gives the elected officials a chance to be like, oh, now I've identified places that, because sometimes these problems that we talk about are so, feel so unwieldy, and we're talking about comp plans and miles of street. They don't know where to begin. So when you can zero in on a space and say, start right here. The community lives here. They love this space. They've already designed ideas. It runs the traps and does a lot of things that makes it easier to make those things permanent afterwards.
Another question I have, a lot of your projects look like they're kind of based on areas that kind of had a historical vibrancy, or it's a vacant space, and so you can kind of start from the ground up. Do you have any examples, or have had success in kind of 1990s suburban?
Yeah. In fact, we're doing a project in Montgomery County, outside of DC right now, and it's literally it was probably a 1980s shopping strip, largest I've ever seen. Completely empty. They had a 6-lane road, and they designed a new road, which made that the old road not necessary anymore. And so it just basically killed the businesses in those areas. So right now, in fact, we'll be out there in about a week with our team, basically infilling the parking lot, redesigning in a new way. The other idea that we just kind of threw out through that process was like, look, you got this 6-lane road that you don't need anymore. Why don't you just take all the traffic that's median separated, move it over to one side, make it a 2-way with a center turn, and then we'll use this other 3 lanes and make it into this linear park. And so that was just an idea that we threw out there, and it was amazing. They immediately grabbed it, like, this is great, and they started assembling all their teams, and they're starting that work now to redesign that space. So that's one example. Downtown Dallas, one of our earliest projects was an area that had no bones. It was a part of the downtown that had been just leveled after the SNL scandals and things like that. So we took the center of the road, because we had no bones to work with, and we made a La Rambla. We made a market space out of the center and made thin the roads on the outside of that. So, but with more examples on our website, you can see every kind of, again, suburban, urban, rural that we've worked with. So
Thank you.
thank you. All right, thank you guys. That's it for me. This is one more thing. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Great. Thank you all so much. I hope that you got to see the diversity between our 2 speakers today and can see the connection between long-range visioning and implementing tangible results kind of in the short term. Thank you so much for joining us for lunch. After a short break, our breakout sessions will start for the afternoon. Thank you.